The trunk opened. Letters spilled out. And Dr. Phil's face changed completely. The Dr. Phil Show. Stage 29. Another Wednesday taping. The audience settled into their seats expecting the usual format: family drama, intervention, Dr. Phil's signature tough love approach cutting through years of dysfunction. But sitting on stage was an 84-year-old woman named Eleanor Hartwell, and beside her chair sat an old steamer trunk. Brown leather. Weathered brass corners. The kind of luggage people used in the 1950s when travel meant trains and ocean liners and journeys that took days instead of hours. Dr. Phil walked onto the stage, greeting the audience, his usual confident stride. He glanced at the trunk, then at Eleanor, then at the production notes in his hand. "Eleanor Hartwell," Dr. Phil said, settling into his chair across from her. "You contacted our producers 3 months ago with a story about family secrets. And you brought a trunk?" Eleanor nodded, her weathered hands resting on the trunk's closed lid. "This trunk belonged to my mother. She died in 2019 at the age of 97. I found it in her attic while cleaning out her house. It was locked. Took me 2 years to work up the courage to break the lock. And what's inside?" Eleanor's voice trembled. "Letters. Hundreds of them. All from 1959. All written by my mother. None of them ever mailed." She reached down and unlatched the trunk. The lid creaked open. And letters poured out like a dam breaking. Hundreds of envelopes, yellowed with age, edges worn, tied in bundles with faded ribbon. They spilled onto the stage floor, scattered across the small table, a cascade of 65-year-old correspondence that had never reached its destination. Dr. Phil stood up. Not his usual measured movement, but an abrupt, genuine reaction. He walked closer to the trunk, staring at the sheer volume of letters. "How many are there?" His voice had lost its professional cadence, replaced by authentic shock. 647. Eleanor said quietly. "I counted them. All written between January and November 1959. All addressed to the same person. None of them ever sent. Dr. Phil has listened to thousands of stories over 20 years, but none of them started like this." An elderly woman opened a vintage trunk on stage and the letters inside revealed a 65-year-old secret. Dr. Phil picked up one of the letters carefully, as if it might disintegrate in his hands. The envelope was addressed in elegant cursive script, "To my dearest James, with all my love, Dorothy." A 1959 postage stamp, never cancelled, still affixed to the corner. "Who was James?" Dr. Phil asked. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "My father. Or at least, the man my mother loved. The man she was engaged to marry. The man who disappeared in 1959 and she spent the rest of her life trying to find." The studio went silent. 300 people leaning forward. Cameras locked on Eleanor's face. Dr. Phil still holding that single letter like it contained something sacred. "Tell me the story," Dr. Phil said, sitting back down but keeping the letter in his hands. "From the beginning." Eleanor took a shaky breath and began. Her mother, Dorothy Hartwell, was 23 years old in 1959. She lived in a small town in Pennsylvania, worked as a secretary at a law firm, and was engaged to marry James Mitchell, a young architect she'd known since high school. They'd been together for 5 years. The wedding was planned for December 1959. Invitations had been printed. Dorothy's dress had been fitted. In January 1959, James got a job opportunity in California. A prestigious firm in San Francisco wanted him for a 6-month project. It was the break he'd been waiting for. The kind of opportunity that could launch his entire career. "Go," Dorothy had told him. "6 months will fly by. You'll come back in time for the wedding. And then we'll build our life together." James left in February. They'd agreed to write letters every day. This was 1959, before cheap long-distance calls, before email, before any of the technology that makes distance feel manageable. Letters were how people stayed connected. Dorothy wrote faithfully. Every single day. Sometimes twice a day. She'd write during her lunch break at work, describing her day, sharing town gossip, counting down the days until James returned. She'd write at night before bed, pouring out her heart, her hopes, her dreams for their future. She'd address each letter carefully, affix the stamp, seal the envelope, and then she'd place it in the trunk. Because James's letters had stopped coming in March. 1 week of silence became 2. 2 weeks became a month. Dorothy kept writing, kept addressing envelopes, kept stamping them. But she never mailed them because she didn't know where to send them. James had given her an address in San Francisco, a boarding house where he'd arranged to stay. But when Dorothy finally called the boarding house in April, they told her James Mitchell had checked out in early March with no forwarding address. She called the architecture firm. They told her James had quit after only 3 weeks. No explanation. No notice. He'd simply stopped showing up. Dorothy was frantic. She called hospitals. She filed a missing person report. She contacted his family, but James had been estranged from them for years, and they knew nothing. He had vanished completely. My mother never stopped writing to him, Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face now. Even after months passed. Even after a year. She'd write letters she couldn't send, addressing them to a man she couldn't find, and she'd put them in this trunk. 647 letters over 10 months. And then in December 1959, she stopped. Why? Dr. Phil asked gently. Because that's when she found out she was pregnant. With me. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The studio erupted in gasps. Dr. Phil's expression shifted from shock to deep concern. He set down the letter he'd been holding and leaned forward. Eleanor, did your mother ever marry? Yes. In 1960, she married Robert Hartwell. A good man. A kind man. He knew about James. My mother was honest with him. He married her anyway, knowing she was pregnant with another man's child. He raised me as his own. He never treated me as anything less than his daughter. Did he know about the letters? Eleanor shook her head. I don't think so. The trunk was always in my mother's closet when I was growing up, but it was locked. I never knew what was inside. After my stepfather died in 1995, my mother moved to a smaller apartment, and the trunk went into storage. I forgot about it. Until she died and I had to clean out her things. Dr. Phil stood up again and walked to the trunk. He knelt beside it, looking at the scattered letters, picking up a few, examining the dates on the postmarks that were never cancelled. Have you read these? He asked Eleanor. Some of them. Not all. There. She paused, searching for words. They're beautiful. And heartbreaking. She poured her soul into every one. She wrote about wedding plans that would never happen. She wrote about wanting children with him. She wrote about forgiving him for leaving, if only he'd come back and explain. And near the end, she wrote about being pregnant, and not knowing how to tell him even if she could find him. Dr. Phil pulled out one letter, carefully removed it from its envelope, and read aloud. My dearest James, it's been 7 months since I've heard from you. 7 months of not knowing if you're safe, if you're thinking of me, if you even remember the life we planned. I'm beginning to think you're never coming back. And I need to tell you something, even though you'll never read these words. I'm carrying our child. Our baby will be born in the spring. And I don't know whether to hope you return or to pray you stay gone, because I don't know which would hurt less. His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. The audience was openly crying now. Eleanor had her face in her hands. Dr. Phil carefully refolded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Eleanor, he said, returning to his chair but maintaining that unusual gentleness in his voice. Why did you bring these letters here? What are you hoping to find? Eleanor looked up, her face streaked with tears. Because I want to know what happened to him. My mother died never knowing. She lived 84 years after 1959, married to a good man, built a good life, but there was always this shadow. This unanswered question. And now she's gone and I'm the only one left who knows about these letters. I'm 84 years old, Dr. Phil. I don't have much time left either. And I want to know who my father was. I want to know why he left. I want to know if there's any family out there who might want to know I exist. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. Dr. Phil looked at the letters scattered across the stage. At Eleanor's desperate, aging face. At the audience holding its collective breath. He made a decision. "Stop the cameras," he said. The director's voice came through the speakers. "Dr. Phil, we're in the middle of—" I said stop the cameras. "Everybody stay where you are. Eleanor, don't move." He walked off stage, pulling his cell phone from his pocket, already dialing. His producer Carla met him in the wings, confusion on her face. "Call our research team," Dr. Phil said, his voice low and urgent. "I want every available person on this. James Mitchell, California, 1959. Architecture firms in San Francisco. Missing persons reports. Obituaries. Hospital records. Everything. I want answers and I want them today. Dr. Phil, even if we find something, it's been 65 years. Then we find his family. We find someone who knew him. We find something that gives this woman closure before she dies carrying the same question her mother died with. Make it happen." Carla nodded and hurried away, already making calls. Dr. Phil returned to the stage. The audience was still silent, sensing something unprecedented was happening. "Eleanor," Dr. Phil said, "I'm going to do something I rarely do. I'm going to put this show on hold. I'm going to have my entire research team working on this case. And we're not leaving this stage until we have some answers for you." Eleanor's hands flew to her mouth. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. Your mother wrote 647 letters to a man she loved. Letters she never got to send. Letters that have been sitting in a trunk for 65 years. That deserves answers. You deserve answers." Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. The show went into an unscheduled break. What was supposed to be a 45-minute taping turned into 3 hours. Dr. Phil stayed with Eleanor backstage, going through letters together, looking for clues. Dates. Locations. Names of friends James had mentioned. Anything that might help trace a man who'd vanished in 1959. The research team worked frantically. Phone calls to county records offices in California. Searches through digitized newspaper archives. Genealogy databases. Social Security death records. 2 hours in, they found something. James Mitchell hadn't disappeared by choice. In March 1959, he'd been involved in a serious car accident on Highway 1 north of San Francisco. The crash had left him in a coma for 6 weeks. When he woke up, he had severe memory loss. He couldn't remember his name, where he was from, or why he was in California. With no identification on him, and no one to claim him, he'd been transferred to a state psychiatric facility. He'd spent 2 years there, slowly regaining fragments of memory but never enough to piece together his complete identity. By 1961, he'd been released with a new identity constructed from the few memories he could access. He'd believed his name was James Martin. He'd rebuilt a life from scratch, never knowing he'd left someone behind. Never knowing about Dorothy's letters. Never knowing about the daughter who would spend her life wondering about him. James Mitchell. Or James Martin, as he'd called himself for 63 years, had died in 2018 at the age of 86, in a nursing home in Portland, Oregon. When Dr. Phil's producer brought him this information, he stood in the backstage hallway reading the report twice, making sure he understood. Then he went to find Eleanor. "We need to go back on stage," he said gently. "I have some answers for you." They returned to the studio. The audience had waited patiently, understanding they were witnessing something beyond typical television. Dr. Phil sat across from Eleanor, the trunk still open between them, letters still scattered on the floor. "Eleanor, we found him. We found James Mitchell." Eleanor's breath caught. "Is he? He passed away in 2018. I'm sorry." Eleanor nodded slowly, tears falling. "Tell me what happened. Please." Dr. Phil told her everything. The car accident. The coma. The memory loss. The decades James had lived under a different name, never knowing he'd had a fiancé waiting for him, never knowing he had a daughter. "He didn't leave you," Dr. Phil said, his voice thick with emotion. "He didn't abandon your mother. He was hurt, and he couldn't remember, and by the time he could think clearly again, so much time had passed that he didn't know how to find his way back to a life he couldn't fully remember." Eleanor was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. Dr. Phil moved to sit beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "But there's something else," Dr. Phil said quietly. "James had a son. Your half-brother. His name is Michael Martin. He's 61 years old, and he lives in Seattle. And when we told him about you, about the letters, about everything, he wants to meet you." Eleanor's head snapped up. "What?" "Your half-brother. He exists. And he's on a plane right now coming here." The studio erupted. Not in applause, but in collective sobs. 300 people watching a woman discover she wasn't alone. Dr. Phil reached into the trunk and pulled out one specific letter. "Your mother wrote this in November 1959. The last letter. I think you should keep it with you when you meet Michael. It's her words. Her love. And now it finally has somewhere to go." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. 3 hours later, Michael Martin walked onto that stage. He held a photograph of his father from the 1990s. An old man who had lived a full life despite losing the first part of it. Eleanor and Michael embraced. Brother and sister, meeting at 84 and 61, connected by 647 letters that were never sent but finally found their purpose. Dr. Phil arranged for the letters to be professionally preserved. Today they're in the National Archives as a testament to love that survived amnesia, time, and silence. Eleanor Hartwell died peacefully in 2024. In her hand was her mother's final letter, and beside her bed sat her brother Michael, who had become family in the last year of her life. The trunk sits in Michael's home now. A reminder that some stories take 65 years to finish,